If you missed him last Saturday on Art Midnight, if you're new to the program, or both, well, here he is again, Jay Dyer. Because an hour on terrestrial radio is simply not enough time in commercial breaks to really get into anything that we want to get into at the depth that we want to get into it at. So, let me tell you about him. He's known for being the mastermind of the premier film and philosophy site on the net, film and philosophy site, jaysanalysis.com. And above all, his graduate work focused on the interplay of film, geopolitics, and espionage. Well, that makes perfect sense now, but it didn't earlier when people were going, Jay, why are you doing this? What are you talking about? Well, now they're getting an idea what he's talking about. He's a public speaker, he's a lecturer, he's a comedian. He's an author of the popular title, Esoteric Hollywood, Sex, Cults, and Symbols in Film. First book made it Amazon's #1 spot in his first month of that release in the film and Hollywood category. Then Esoteric Hollywood 2 was just released and is available. Known for his in-depth commentary and satire and ongoing celebrity impressions, he has appeared on numerous nationally syndicated radio and TV shows, and most recently, the co-host he is and co-creator with Jay Weidner of the TV show Hollywood Decoded on Gaia TV. He's busy, and he's here with us. Hey, Jay, how you doing? That was a long grind. We had to chew a bunch of dirt to get this going on today. Unbelievable.
Well, I'm glad we're here. I'm glad it's finally working out. So thank you for having me back, John. I appreciate it.
Me too. You know, we just touched on a bunch of things, and you know, you've been on the program before. We talked about a lot of this stuff. We know there's a lot of symbolism in Hollywood. I mean, we get all of that, and I don't know. I can't remember, just because at the end of the week we'll be at program number 1200.
Wow.
I'm going to have a filing system like Sherlock Holmes had, you know, in the old novels, just to keep up with everybody and what they said and when, because so many of the things that are said by yourself and some others are they're poignant. I want to hold on to them. Hence, I have 6 notebooks and lots of sticky notes everywhere. So it's beginning to look like the whole room's beginning to look like Einstein's desk. I just wish I had the brain to go with the messy room and desk.
Is it the archetypal conspiracy theorist room where you have like the cords that connect like one thing to the next? And
no, I got to save something for later. Come on, you know, I don't want to just blow the whole thing with the string and all that. Yeah, that's probably next. Didn't Howard Hughes do that too?
Well, you said that might not be real, so I didn't even think about the possibility that maybe they were trying to make him look bad.
Yeah, right. Well, I'm talking about DiCaprio drawing string for the germ-free zones. And
yeah, right. Pee in jars, exactly.
You know, the thing that intrigued me when we just before we got started here was we haven't, I don't believe, gone in depth. If we did, it's been so long ago, we need to do it again. And that is your lecture series, where you take 30 books, where effectively the authors tell us exactly what they're doing, but ain't nobody paying attention to it. Or it looks that way because ain't nobody stopping it. So could we go there on this?
Yeah, I'd be glad to. I mean, that's one of the things I've done the last couple of years since being on with you that's kind of taken off pretty good. And it started with Tragedy and Hope. You know, I kept hearing so many years people saying, do Tragedy and Hope, do a talk on Tragedy and Hope. So I thought, well, I'm going to have to plow through this gigantic, dusty 1,300-page tome. And I made myself do it. And I did, I think, 16 total hours of lectures, 8 lectures, half and half free, half purchase. And that was such a success that I decided, okay, well, now I'm going to have to do a continuing series around the same idea, because there's so many books, as you said, John, where the global elite literally just lay out the entire plan, not just for, you know, what's going to happen in 5 years, but here's where we want to go in the next 100 years. And it really is that planned out. Now, I don't want to give the elite too much credit or say that they're, you know, gods or whatever, but because they're not. But that's how they operate. They definitely lay things out. And I stumbled onto that through a lot of the fiction, a lot of the Hollywood, the predictive programming. You realize, well, actually, it's not just in the fiction. They've actually been writing real, you know, white papers, globalist planning books, actuaries, where they lay all this out. So it started with Tragedy and Hope, and then I just kind of branched off into, like you said, 30, 32 other similar texts that people aren't reading and paying attention to.
What do I want to talk about, or just ask you about John Coleman and the Committee of 300? Does this man exist? Is he gone? Is he deceased? There's a phone number for him, and I don't care if you call it this week or next year. You're going to get the same thing, the same runaround with the phone system there that makes it sound like he's there, but he's not really there. It rings weird. just strange. I just wonder what that's all about. Is that man for real? I'd love to have talked to him.
Well, I've read his book on the Committee of 300 many years ago, and I think he's right about aspects of the Tavistock Institute analysis. I did do a whole talk on Tavistock and what I could dig up from Tavistock, and read Daniel Eslin's book on Tavistock and all that. But I think that with a lot of those older generation conspiracy researchers, I know you know all about this because you were reading these guys back in the day. Not trying to offend you with your. I know you're a whippersnapper young guy. I'm not trying to say you're an old guy.
I'd like to think of myself as a young, rough fellow,
You're a young, rough fellow. So, but
I got about double what you got. I'll put it that way.
But I'm sure you were, back in the day, you were reading, Guy Carr and Gary Allen, all those guys who had kind of been the first generation of really exposing the New World Order. Ralph Epperson, those kind of guys. I think they got a lot of things right, but they didn't have access to the internet. They couldn't, double check and really dig in the way that we can now with everything being so accessible. So I think John Coleman probably got a good bit of stuff right, and overall the ideas right. I think some of the stuff is about Tavistock, and I'm not convinced that Theodore Adorno wrote all the Beatles songs, but it's possible that Tavistock was definitely involved in the Beatles, and Adorno does talk about dissonant music and this kind of stuff, and kind of trying to culture create. That's something that the Frankfurt School was definitely involved in, and the Frankfurt School was allied with the Rockefeller and the Western, moneyed elite for sure.
People seem to think of these the intelligentsia as this just group of people that just kind of stick to themselves, and they have their effects here and there. By the time an effect is felt, it's really for the benefit of people. It's almost as though they're regarded as a bunch of intellectual hobbyists who don't actually accomplish anything in the world. But that's just not the case. They're changing the whole world. We only have to look now. We've kept our backs turned for so long. Now that we finally turn around, we go, "Oh, no, what's all this? It didn't used to be this way." Well, because we weren't paying attention.
Yeah, this really comes to the fore in H.G. Wells. I was thinking about when I wrote the first book, I had watched a bunch of science fiction movies, and I thought, well, I can't ignore the character of H.G. Wells because he was the preeminent propagandist of his day. He was doing Bernays style propaganda before Bernays was. He was really the pioneer of propaganda. He created the image of the Hun and the poster for World War I, really kicked that off with the propaganda. And I realized that he was in these elite circles of the Royal Society. Even though he was from the lower class, the working class, he was kind of recruited into being the face of humanism, liberalism, democracy, all this kind of stuff. And when you read H.G. Wells, you really get into all the stories, and then you branch out of the fiction, and then you read the nonfiction. You read The Open Conspiracy, you read his book, The New World Order. He just literally says everything. He lays it all out. He says, let's have a global technocratic government. Let's have a one world currency. Let's have total disarmament, no gun rights, no private, economic commerce. You can't make your own decisions about where your money goes. Let's have it all centralized in a United Federal Nations World Socialist Republic, basically. Star Trek's Federation, basically. It's more or less what Wells is laying out. And it's just amazing because it's all in the book. And he's a high-level communist guy. He's totally sold on Marx. And then you realize that what he's putting in the fiction is actually just what he wrote in all those faction or planning books. It's not fiction. He even says something like, I think it's in Open Conspiracy. He says something to the effect of, we don't have to worry about capitalism and markets, he says, as committed technocrats. He says, because what will happen is, he says, we'll just let that system run crazy. We'll let it, and almost he almost implies like they want it to collapse, and then out of the collapse, out of the ashes, the new technocratic system can come in on the heels of the notion that, oh, we'll see everything that you had before, freedom that you had before, you can't see, it doesn't work, right? It just collapses. So now you got to have the experts, now you got to have the managerial society, now you got to have the tech elite running every little area of your life.
Sounds like a great idea, doesn't it?
Sounds like a dystopia. That's how you started the show, talking about dystopia now.
These people don't seem to be able to run their own lives that well.
It's a great point.
When you look deeply into their situations, Whether I don't care whether it's Gates or, I mean, pick one, pick a billionaire. There's a lot of kinkification going on in what would otherwise be called a lifestyle. These people are clearly insane. Do you ever wind up running? Maybe. No, you're a steady guy. You just walk toward the spiritual side of things. Man, this looks like the battle between the angels and the demons. That's exactly what it looks like. It looks like it's between God Almighty and the devil himself. That's exactly what this looks like, because it is just the most unbelievable deceit. And people like yourself, me, we see this. And then we turn on the TV and we see millions of people that don't see this.
Yeah.
I mean, how is this even possible? They're not that stupid. We see them out there on the street. We talk to them sometimes at the gas station. They're not that stupid. How is this happening? It's almost like mass hypnosis that's not on all the time, just some of the time.
Yeah. I mean, Paul in the New Testament, he talks about a mass deception, a mass spirit of blinding and this kind of stuff. I think that's definitely the ultimate big picture, because when you study this stuff, you get into it, you start with the kind of, maybe it's the Federal Reserve, right? You start with that, and you get into the getting red pilled, and then you learn about depopulation or these different topics. Then it just kind of builds, and you go further and further down the rabbit hole, and then you're at the point where you're looking at like, oh, there's satanic rituals, and there's trafficking and all this crazy, just outright evil stuff. And I think it really forces you to come to grips with big metaphysical or religious spiritual questions, right? You're forced to say, well, maybe it's not just political. Maybe there's also something big scale, grand scale, and spiritual going on. I think then that's when we start to ask the right kinds of questions, and we start to say, wait a minute, there's not just the here and the now. It's not just matter. There's also spirit, and that spiritual realm, I think, is real, and it's something that we all have to contend with every day. And as this plan, it is a unified plan, as it comes to fruition. The good side of this is that it's going to force more and more people to look at the reality of spirit, the reality of good and evil, and to try to make decisions based on those absolutes and not just kind of relativistic or subjectivist ideas of like, well, whatever I think is good for me, and whatever you think is good for you. We're being forced to confront outright, abject, total evil.
Blatant falsehood. They have their faces suffused with self-righteousness, which is an emotion as dangerous as hate easily. And people permit it. But I wonder about that. I mean, how about the NFL stadium? Sorry to say, what I mean by that is the NFL stadiums, many times there are more empty seats than there are attendees at the games. All these big companies are losing money. A lot of them are saying nothing. I mean, I saw a deal the other night. It was, I think it was Jack Ryan. Okay, I knew some Mayan counties, so I started Jack Ryan. And these guys had locked these people in church and gassed them, and they were all knocked out and all of that. And no, that's another one. So it's counterpart. Sorry, saying there are only 6 plots for all of them, right? So no, this was another deal. There was a shoot 'em up. It was an internal spy agency going after spies. They had infiltrators to shoot the place up. And the ambulances are there. A bunch of people are all shot to hell and coming out, and they're going, and they're being helped. And it's set in Germany. And the guy comes out and says, no, it wasn't anything like that. This is just another tragic example of workplace violence. And it wasn't. It was a shoot 'em up between spy agencies, and a bunch of them got whacked and wounded. So, and people go, oh, okay. Because even if they know the truth, there's nothing they can do about it.
Yeah.
What can they do about it? What if somebody runs out there and declares that wasn't workplace violence? There's something deeper to this.
Right.
Okay, well, he's right, but he might as well be whistling in a hurricane.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think apathy is one of the spirits that the elite want to interject into the masses, make us apathetic, you can't do anything, but that's not true. Actually, good is real. You can fight on the side of good, and good can accomplish things. So it's just another, it's like if you read 1984, I think the purpose, I'm not going to question Orwell's motives per se, but you come away from that book thinking, well, there's no hope. There's no point in this. It's a boot stamping on your face forever. I've always viewed it as just a version of propaganda, actually, to demoralize. Or this is kind of psychological warfare 101: demoralize the enemy, the target, and then they lose the will to fight. So we have to not be demoralized, first of all. And I think once you do get to the bottom of the rabbit hole and realize that it is spiritual, it's actually a good thing. I mean, it's tough getting there. You kind of go through an emotional process of feeling, shocked by everything, and then you're upset, you're angry. You tell everybody, all the red pills, and then people don't want to hear it, and you get depressed, and then you feel alienated, and then eventually over time people start to wake up, and that's what's happening. People are waking up. I mean, the reaction that I've had to the stuff that I put out there that I think is even sounded crazy to me 10 years ago, people now, all the stuff that I said 10 years ago, it's like, oh yeah, well, of course the CIA has offices in Hollywood. Yeah, of course all this is programming, and it's like, it's now the stuff that's crazy is passe. So that's actually a good sign. Even Brzezinski himself, before he passed away, he said, he's projecting a mass political awakening. And I think it is happening. I mean, Trump, whatever one's thoughts of Trump, I mean, he has interjected and forced people to deal with fake news, to deal with this stuff, force people to confront the lies in the media. And that's a huge positive.
Well, I'm thinking that this political, if you will, socio-political awakening, that are you saying Brzezinski predicted this when he was passing away?
He gave a speech talking about it. Now, I mean, he didn't think it was a good thing. He was just kind of saying, this is happening. There is a mass awakening. Never before has there been such a global awakening. Right. And then he goes on to his eternal resting place, where that might be. But yeah, he talked about it. So, even I've read Brookings Institute, when Trump was elected, the Brookings Institute, all these big global think tanks, the ISS and so forth, they put out all these papers. CFR put out all these papers saying, what are we going to do about the rise of populism? Populism is popping up in these other nations. It's got to be stamped out, all this stuff. And granted, the populism, the nationalism is not perfect, but it is a legitimate reaction. And if we can harken back to H.G. Wells once again, H.G. Wells, in Shape of Things to Come, he actually predicted the reaction to globalism. He predicted the nationalist reaction. And if you remember, it's a grainy old kind of movie. It's hard to watch, but you've got this like barbaric dude wearing pelts and skins who represents the nationalist. He's like a Trumpish Putin type character. and he's portrayed as this oaf, this buffoon, and then the enlightened technocratic elite just kind of brush him aside as they attack with their drones from the sky, right? So H.G. Wells long ago predicting all this stuff in his science fiction. So I think that they knew this was coming, and so they kind of put out perhaps demoralizing science fiction like 1984 that would make people feel like there was no hope. Now, again, maybe just a theory, maybe Eric Blair, really was awoke and he really was trying to wake people up. I don't know. But I've never come away from either Brave New World Brave New World has the dude commit suicide at the end. 1984 has the boot on your face forever. So I think those are, in a way, they're woke books. They do wake people up, I guess. But I don't trust people like Aldous Huxley. Aldous Huxley would play, just like Bertrand Russell, he would play the persona of the Democrat, of the man of the people. And then over here on the side, he's also giving lectures where he's snootily laughing about how, well, of course, you can't actually even understand the things that I'm saying. All of you here in the Berkeley audience, you don't even know what I'm talking about. I'm actually talking about killing you all, and you don't understand it. He's literally just in their face, gaslighting them in the Berkeley lectures. So I don't think these people are at all really men of the people. They're total frauds.
Wow. It's a bit like Jimi Hendrix lyrics, you see. You don't really know what they mean, because you can't be in that state of mind any more than you can be in my state of mind. And I'm not taking LSD, nor can I play guitar.
Do you remember? Have you heard those Berkeley lectures?
What's that?
Have you seen those Berkeley lectures and interviews with Huxley?
Yeah, I've seen pieces of them here and there, and I just thought. Yeah,
there's that one part that just always blows me away where he literally says something like that. He's like, of course, I'm telling you your future. And he says to the audience, he says, but you're all too stupid to even know that I'm not telling you fiction. I'm telling you your future, but you don't even understand it. And the audience was just like.
Yeah, and nobody's even insulted.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, because there's this presumption that this is an intellectual man. He can talk down to us because he is who he
Well, he's
is.
got the British accent, right? He's talking down.
Oh yeah, man. That Radio 4 accent works even in today's epoch.
It does, yeah.
Unbelievable. You know, HG was head of British intelligence, foreign intelligence for British in World War One, and it's my understanding that he embraced Fabian socialism for a while, but then went, nah, this is not really it. You know. So in the end, he backed away from it. Damn well better have. If I have to wear the last name and be related to him, he better have come out of it.
Well, that's interesting because he does, in the later books, he does talk about how Marxism itself is not going to be the final system. And so he kind of eventually grew out of that. And he thought that what would have to happen is that he said capitalism would have to run its course. There might be a period of socialism. He's like, but neither of those would really be the final system. And if I recall, this is kind of where we get the idea of the third way. So this is more of the globalism books, people like Alvin Toffler, Quigley. Actually, Quigley's who was Clinton's mentor at Georgetown. Quigley seems to kind of be of this persuasion as well. And the idea is that, well, what we'll do is we'll just kind of let Black communism smash up against capitalism. We'll let them fight it out, and then what will emerge from this dialectical exchange will be this new technocratic age where everything will be controlled by central AI hubs and all this kind of stuff. And this is where all those guys are writing a bunch of science fiction. Asimov does this too. Asimov has in Foundation series, he's basically got Google predicting through giant algorithmic, tabulations what mass movements of people are doing and how their thoughts are going and how to sway mass opinion and this kind of stuff. So you're absolutely right that I think Wells did develop his thought over time, but the way he developed it was that he still thought it would be it basically says at the end of, I think it's Open Conspiracy, he says, look, the future is going to be Star Trek, but it's not for you. You normal people, it's for the technocratic elite. So why don't you just die? Just please die. But you have purpose. He says, now that we've lost religion, you need a purpose. He says, I'm going to give you a purpose. Your purpose is to die for the sake of the emergence of the tech elite world order. That's literally what he says in the book. I mean, it's kind of blew me away. But what I've noticed reading all these guys, right, including Arthur Kessler, Ghost of the Machine, Bertrand Russell, Miles Copeland, even CIA of his memoirs, right? Book after book after book after book, 30 plus. What you get is there's basically 4 or 5 commandments, you could say, of globalism that all of these writers share in common. And you can't question them. They're dogmatic. They all believe it and they all promote it. They might differ on areas of like the game plan. How do we bring this into fruition? How do we bring in this, area? They'll disagree and debate that stuff, but nobody disagrees on a global currency. Nobody disagrees on total materialism and Darwinism. Nobody disagrees on a one world religion. Nobody disagrees on transhumanism, right? Which is another one of the globalism books. Julian Huxley's foundational philosophy of the United Nations, right? He writes this 60-page treatise on the foundational philosophy of the UN. He's the guy who coined the term transhumanism. And he says, we've just got to kill everybody. We got to bring in the technocracy, right? And this will all be centralized. There won't be any more commerce. Everything will be run by computers. And you'll just get social credits, right? This is Bertrand Russell and H.G. Wells 100 years ago said you would be on a social credit system. And if you say the naughty word, you don't get your weekly credits.
And if you say the what word?
If you say whatever the naughty word of the week is.
The naughty word.
Yeah.
Gotcha. And the name again of the man who coined the term transhumanism?
Julian Huxley, Aldous' brother.
Julian Huxley, that's it.
So if you read the Philosophy of UNESCO, which is what Julian wrote, and it's funny because Julian wrote all these books. He wrote tons and tons of books, and they're all the same. Every book that Julian wrote, they're just saying that, look, we're all just, pea soup that's evolving into robots. So let us run your life, and if you don't, you need to die. We're going to kill you. That's literally what he writes in the book.
Well, I suppose this begs the question: what do you do about a bunch of maniacs like that who could, I suppose, if enough people were influenced by their genius, bring this thing about? No more humans. Kill all the humans. It's all going to be all the machines and computers with somewhat human-like souls, sort of simulations.
Yeah, I mean, the background I see behind you right now is looks like the Blade Runner Tyrell Corporation ziggurat in the background. I mean, that's essentially what they have in mind. Is they're going to be Eldon Tyrell, and they're going to send out their replicants, and the replicants will be the new humanity, right? This kind of stuff. So, what do we do against it? Well, I'm doing what I didn't know to do against it, which is to take book by book by book, because everybody bitches and says, "I don't have time to read. I can't read all these books." Well, I do have time to read, so I read them for you. I summarize them for you. That's what I do in this series, and I tell you what's going on. And now every day, the news comes out and it just vindicates all of these books, all these writings, right? I think Brzezinski said it well when he said we're between two ages, right? There's the previous age of the way humankind operated for millennia, and now we're entering into the new age. And he doesn't necessarily mean the new age like Aquarius or whatever, man. I mean, he kind of has that in mind, but he means the technocratic era. And so it's the same thing that all these guys have in common. And the way that we fight it is to do what we're doing. Your show, my show, all this kind of stuff. It has awakened a lot of people. And I think as people see the damage that a lot of this stuff does to societies, to humans, I think a lot of people are going to reject this. I think they're going to say the utopia that's being promised is not going to be delivered. And that's always what we see in utopian movements, right? All the socialist, communist, Marxist movements are all utopian, and they don't work. They always fail.
So in Blade Runner, I can't even remember now. Did the girl turn out to be human or not?
Rachel is a replicant, and so is Deckard. So the Harrison Ford character and Rachel are Deckard. That was kind of the thing. Is Ridley Scott left everybody kind of debating for many, many years whether Harrison Ford was a replicant, and it turns out yes, he is. So he did an interview I think a few years ago where he finally confirmed that. But yeah, she is. In fact, my fiance is friends with Mary Sean Young, and so she's actually confirmed that with her. So, you are a replicant, and so is Deckard. They're both replicants. Yeah.
Well, that's quite something. So I wonder. I suppose we can always. Is it that we back engineer what the writer or the movie creator must have meant rather than we're being affected by what they created? This is their creation. In other words, do we sort of create their creation? Do we create the effect of their creation? I mean, I suppose you do. I mean, of course, if you clap or if you boo, that's the easy part. But I mean, do you see what I'm getting at? We can go back and see what these guys were talking about and say, but maybe that wasn't it at all.
How do we know the artist's intention? Is that what you're saying?
Yes. I'm wondering. It just seems to me that you can take a series of events, write them all down and go, well, this must be what happened. For all of these things that happen in the series, that may or may not be true. It's just you just wove a damn good story because you're a better storyteller than this other guy who was analyzing the same details.
Yeah. So, all right, that's a good point. My training is philosophy, so I can tell you that in philosophy, that's called the Texas sharpshooter fallacy, and that's the fallacy where you see a series of events that may have had a correlation or a connection, and you read or interpret them as having this definite correlation, but they may not have, right? That is an important warning for people who do conspiracy research or intelligence research or any of that kind of a research, or any researcher in general. You have to be aware of that Texas sharpshooter fallacy. I would say that, yes, it's true. Like in my book, a lot of times if I'm speculating, I try to say, well, I'm speculating here. I don't know exactly. I don't know Kubrick's motives. In fact, I typically say, if I'm talking about Kubrick's film, was he trying to expose this stuff or was he in on it? I don't actually know. I just try to go with what I think the film is saying. Is David Lynch exposing Hollywood, or is he an insider? I just go with what I see in the films. And maybe it's a little bit of both. Maybe sometimes people are conflicted. Maybe Kubrick at times felt like he should just go with the establishment so he can use the Zeiss lens or whatever, or maybe he's sick of it and he wants to expose it. Maybe people are conflicted. But you raise a great question, John. I don't think there's any easy answer to, can we always be 100% certain? I wouldn't say so. But interpreting the arts is one thing, but interpreting the writings of the globalists themselves, that's something else. I mean, they just lay it out flat out, objective facts. Interpreting the arts, aesthetics, it definitely involves a lot more speculation.
That's why 3 Days of the Condor with Redford and Faye Dunaway grabbed me so much, because he was just a reader of books.
Right.
And so he reads this one particular book. Well, now he's read it. But it turns out that even though he was reading a work of fiction, it's like, well, was the author really, did he have some sort of way to figure out that Redford would eventually read his book because it was styled this way and it was about these subjects? So knowing that the intelligence services would probably would read that book, would they pick up that there really is a plot in here and I'm trying to tip them off to it? Or is it just a work of fiction, which it just so happens by way of a coincidence, which is everything really, coincidence of events. But turns out that it's true. And now they're worried that their agent has read this and they put two and two together later, because what was written in this book, these guys actually pulled off. They never read the book. They just I didn't write a book about what we're about to pull, the caper we're about to pull. Well, it's in this book. And guess what? One of our agents is reading it. Well, that's not good, is it? No, it's not. We're going to have to kill him,
That's where it gets hairy. You're absolutely right. I mean, if you, like, one of the things I focused on in grad work was British intelligence fiction. So, like, they were really into this, right? And they had a kind of a different law, Official Secrets Act, where, they would be in big trouble if they put anything in fact, if you would. So a lot of times the writers, Joseph Conrad, people like Graham Greene, they would put into, who were, they were British intelligence people, they would put it into the fiction more or less in veiled way, what went down or what might go down in the future. Ian Fleming did this all the time, especially. Even his brother, Peter Fleming, there's a novel he did about Rudolf Hess, or it's actually Hitler in the novel, but he did a story about Hess piloting into the UK and, like 6 months or a year or a few years before it even happened with Hess. So this kind of stuff is common, and it really popped up with a lot of the British spy fiction. That's why I wrote the books I did, because that's what tipped me off to it, and I focused on Fleming a lot. But I think that there are some cases where it really stands out that this stuff is definitely happening, definitely going on. And again, you're right. Many cases, it's who knows, it's debatable, but that's why I focus on Fleming so much in my grad work, was because there's no doubt with him. I mean, there's absolutely no doubt that a lot of the stuff that he's putting into the fiction is absolutely right. I mean, you've got basically, you think about Moonraker in the novel, that's the V2 rocket program. That's kind of Operation Paperclip, maybe hinted at. There's so many examples of this that it's impossible to chalk it up all up to coincidence. And when you realize that many, many, many people who do write screenplays and who have written fiction stories that are the bases of a lot of movies, that they did work in intelligence, well, it all makes perfect sense.
Sure. Why else would CIA need to have an Office of Film Liaison there? I mean, they're watching. I guess they saw 3 Days of the Condor also.
Well, the intelligence agencies have always been involved in film. They've always been involved in production. One of the things I highlighted in my book was the Laurel Canyon Studios, which they didn't just do the atomic bomb footage. They actually produced tons and tons and tons and reels and reels and reels of all kinds of propaganda film. And I did some sleuthing on YouTube one night and just randomly kind of came across Jimmy Stewart. He's doing a FBI propaganda movie, for just sitting there in Laurel Canyon Studios. There's like outtakes and he's, joking around and laughing. But you had to have military clearance to go here. Walt Disney went there. Jimmy Stewart did. Marilyn Monroe did. There's all kinds of stuff that they filmed at Laurel Canyon Studios that vindicates what I'm talking about. It's now defunct. Actually, I drove up there a few years ago. It's Jared Leto's house now. I think he still owns it. But yeah, that's another great example of where you have this really tight connection between high level A-list Hollywood directors, producers, et cetera, and military intelligence. And it was really heavy, during World War I, World War II, really heavy during the Cold War, obviously. And it really never went away.
The Wonderland School is part of that too, right? I think we've talked about before.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, you drive up Wonderland Avenue. There's all kinds of weird locations and sites there. Yeah, I focus a lot on the Hollywood stuff, but it's also true of the music industry as well. Dave McGowan wrote his book on all the music side of it, with basically all of the hippie revolutionary musician people. Their families are all like high level military intelligence and all this stuff. So it's a
so many of the rock stars. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. What's that last very last bit?
It's a family affair.
Yeah.
I'm trying to say.
Yeah. It's funny how many rock stars had a relative that's very, very closely tied to either military or intelligence or both. It's ridiculous. It really is.
Yeah, I couldn't believe it. I mean, it was. You just tumble down these rabbit holes and you see that it's the same for any industry. But when you kind of figure out the big pyramid picture, it's not that surprising. It kind of makes sense that it would be that way. That's just how the world works. And what are the two oldest professions, right? Compromise. We were talking about this the other night on your show. Human compromise, prostitution, right? Espionage, right? Those are the two professions that have been here for forever.
Yeah. It's funny. There's got to be more than one, but there's this outfit, they call themselves the Wrecking Crew. And these were actually, a lot of people wondered, why do my favorite bands suck so bad when they perform live? It's because they didn't play on the record. That's why.
Exactly right. That kind of blew me away. I mean, you know what, by the way, John, there's a movie that came out, an independent movie. I can't prove this, but I feel like they might have read my book, my first book, History of Hollywood, because the main character in the movie, played by Andrew Garfield, he's reading fiction, he's reading comic books, he's reading pop culture. And he says, you know what? It's almost like pop culture is sending messages. So he goes down this long rabbit hole, and it turns out he's really obsessed with like 90s grunge bands, right? Well, he gets led to this elite mansion towards the end of the film, third act. And in this mansion is this billionaire guy who writes all the pop songs. And Andrew Garfield, the main character, he's so shook, right? Because he idolized, Kurt Cobain, Nirvana, and Pearl Jam, and all this stuff. And his whole world has been basically come crashing down. These were his idols, because he finds out that, the actual guy who wrote this song is some old, 70-year-old geezer who just sits at a piano and like writes all the pop songs. Like he wrote Britney Spears, he wrote, Katy Perry, and he wrote Nirvana, and he wrote all the pop songs. It's all fake. And the guy just has like a mental breakdown and comes to find out that, actually there's this whole crew of an inner elite abyss, spoiler alert, inner sanctum billionaire trillionaires who run everything, and they control the culture as well. Culture creation is what it's all about. Under the Silver Lake, by the way, is that film.
So messages were being sent.
They were.
Just not from the source he thought.
Correct. Yeah, he stumbled upon culture creation, much like myself. I'm not saying the movie was written about me. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it seems like maybe somebody read the book and said, hey, you know what? What if we took a book like that and said, take a normal dude who, just sort of reads a bunch of stuff, and he realizes that, hey, maybe, there's culture creation.
Jonas Salk. I was just typing in here, when did those polio vaccines start? And on this day, 1954, the Salk polio vaccine field trials involving 1.8 million children begin at the Franklin Sherman Elementary School in McLean, Virginia. Interesting part of the world, Virginia. What about Jonas Salk? Don't tell me he knew all the weird stuff that was going into vaccines and what they would cause.
Oh yeah,
he did.
Shocker, huh?
No, not really. I'm thinking it's stuff in the vaccines combined with the medications that are given afterwards to some of these vets. It's making them kill themselves. It's now 27 per day, up from 22 last year.
Yeah, I didn't think much about Salk until I read many years ago. I read Dr. Mary's Monkey, and I think this kind of stuff kind of comes up, with vaccines. And so I thought, well, I'm going to have to actually just read Jonas Salk himself. And I was blown away because I wasn't prepared for what I actually read. So I got a hold of it. They're kind of hard to get. They're out of print, but Survival of the Wisest and Man Unfolding, which are two of his print books. And in Survival of the Wisest, you can kind of tell from the title what he thinks, right? So as with all the globalism books, they all start with the crisis. We're at a period of crisis. They don't mean the crisis like we do as red pill woke people. They mean the crisis in the sense of overpopulation. Population has gone up to whatever billion. And if we don't stop it right now, the whole earth is going to die. We're going to blow up. Mother Gaia is going to keel over. Who knows? Whatever. So we've got to step in. And he really harkens to Bertrand Russell here. He says, we as the scientific elite have to step in and commandeer evolution. That's what he says. He says we have to steer evolution so that we can put environmental pressures on the populace to force evolution to create the survival of the wisest. And he actually proposes in the book to utilize vaccines, to utilize additives to the vaccines, and particularly to experiment, I'm not joking, to experiment on embryos in the mother. So this is one of the reasons why they really want to give so many vaccines to pregnant mothers. This is all in Salk's book. I don't, off the top of my head, this is like late 60s, early 70s book. So that's what I covered in one of those lectures was the Salk book. And he sees it as controlling, steering, and putting environmental pressures to force evolution to go in a certain direction. And he's very open about it. He's very candid. I'll add, too, that one of the other globalism book talks, Arthur Kessler's book, Ghost in the Machine, says the exact same thing. You got to read through all this really boring stuff, 380 pages to the end. And at the end of the book, Kessler says, okay, so what all this means is experiment on everybody with vaccines and put chemicals in the food and force people to mutate. And if we force mutate people, he says, it'll cause evolution to create a fitter human. That's literally the mindset.
Yeah, he was one of his quotes is the question we must ask ourselves is, are we being good ancestors? There are several quotes by Jonas Salk, but the first one, of course, is if all the insects were to disappear from the earth within 50 years, all life on earth would end. If all human beings disappeared from the earth within 50 years, all forms of life would flourish. That sounds a little dark. Sounds a little bit true. So are we thinking he's a little bit of a sinister character, or does he?
Oh, totally. Yeah.
If we say we force them to evolve, I mean, his biggest problem was we have a lot of knowledge, but do we have enough wisdom to be able to handle the knowledge? I kind of get that. He wants
yeah, I agree with that. I mean, there's another one.
Humans need to be wise. They know too much. They know too much. They're dangerous. We must give them wisdom and force their evolution. And is it possible it's an evil sounding genius that actually is working for good? Not really.
The problem with that is that I don't think we can do a lot of evil for justifying the ends don't justify the means, right? I mean, okay. When you can kind of let this cat out of the bag, it's Pandora's box, and it leads to just chaos. And I'll be saying, but it's all for the good. And then in the long run, I mean, it'd be like if I put this, it's kind of psychopathic reasoning. You know what I mean? Like psychopaths and people who engage in gaslighting and psychopathy, they'll often blame the victims. They'll say things like, well, yeah, I gaslighted you and abused you for 30 years, but it made you stronger. And don't you appreciate what I did for you? You know what I mean? That's the Salk level of reasoning here. Is just total, psychopathy. I don't think that's the way to go forward. I mean, there's another one of these guys who I did, Fritjof Capra. I did his book, The Turning Point. That was the last globalism book talk. He kind of says the same thing. Like he hones in on a lot of good points of problems in society. Like he talks about, there are environmental problems at times. There are problems with junk food and processed food and all this kind of stuff. Oh, okay, well, that sounds reasonable. And then the solution is always something like, therefore, we kind of have to sneakily, kill everybody. Well, I mean, come on.
Right. he sort of gives himself away and gives him a back door. Gives himself a back door at the same time. Risks, I like to say, always pay off. You learn what to do and what not to do. Well, yeah, but on what scale are we willing to adopt this as part of our philosophical code?
Right.
Where does that stop? Oh, Lord.
Good point.
Good grief, man. Huxley really took it back. All right, I'm going to ask the question instead. Because as I think Salk said, the answer exists. What you must do is ask the right question, because the answer exists. Okay, gotcha. I'm not sure that's 100% all the time. But did Huxley sort of take a backseat to Orwell as far as impact is concerned, or not really?
I would do it the other way around. I would say Huxley is more important than Orwell.
Do you really think so? Yeah.
The only thing I can think of that Huxley didn't catch that, ironically, a movie like THX did catch, because THX, you could tell Lucas was trying to take all those dystopian stories and kind of mesh them into one. And the only thing that I think Huxley, the only thing I think he missed was the AI and the tech stuff. That doesn't really play a big. I mean, it's there kind of in the story in the background, but it doesn't play a huge role. He didn't foresee the idea of, which is odd because his brother coins the term transhumanism. You would have thought he would, really have the AI stuff everywhere in the story. But some people allege that Huxley actually ripped that story off of a previous writer. I don't know, but no, I think the drugging and all that stuff was definitely more in line, more prophetic. There's actually a letter I think he wrote to Wells where they were discussing this back and forth, and I think he says something like that, like, "Well, my good friend, did you not realize that the servitude that's coming is one not where the boot's on your face, but where you're stoned out of your mind, right? Where you feel great and you love and enjoy your servitude." And so I think that was the whole quandary of the elite in the 20th century was figure out how to get people to love their servitude, and the tech stuff is even surpassing the drug stuff. I mean, people are immersing themselves in these virtual worlds, and I think that's the next phase, is that they're going to implement the wearables, the modification of not just the body, but I think even the mind, Neuralink, this kind of stuff that's coming out. I mean, that's the next phase. So eventually, I think the handheld devices, I mean, that's probably, they're going to try to move away from that. We won't even have handheld devices anymore. The smart cities, all this kind of stuff, all this stuff that was in all these, even these 70s, Logan's Run, Zardoz, all that kind of stuff. It's now coming into reality.
Jay, I'm not sure very many people want to go into a future like that. But are we being pulled inexorably toward it? Or can we undo it? Or are we afraid we may miss something if we do undo it? You know what I mean? I don't, as you were speaking those words, I thought, I don't want to live in a world like that. But at the same time, my grandfather probably didn't want to live in a world like the one we've got now. And I can't say that I blame him, although they dealt with everything from, milk sickness to, that's the thing that got Abe Lincoln's mother, It dealt with all sorts of things. I mean, a cut on your hand would kill you.
Yeah.
In the, between what, I think my grandfather was born in 1880. Yeah, he was born in 1880. There are a lot of stuff out there that kill you in 1880. It won't kill you now, although some of it. But then again, something kills everybody eventually, even if it's just time that does it. So there's no point trying to run from the Reaper. You ain't going to make it.
No.
I don't long enough time. But what about that? I mean, if we see a horrible future coming, well, where's the monkey wrench? Where's the gears to jam that thing in there, man? I mean, how do we redirect our destiny? That's the question.
I think that when we return to the idea of spiritual realities, when we get back to things that have actually been suppressed for a long time, like the idea of God, the idea of theology, the idea of metaphysics, this stuff has been intentionally suppressed for a long time. They've been trying to get rid of that. I mean, H.G. Wells said that. He said anything that's traditional, anything that's classical Western Christian religion. It's got to be suppressed. It's got to be put away. It can't be anywhere. Hide that stuff. Get rid of it. And ultimately, Fahrenheit 451 type stuff, they want to just completely get rid of books. I mean, I think, books will kind of be a thing that the elites have. Like it'll be, whoa, you have books? Whoa. Like some kind of weird collector's, fetish or something. That's where they want to take things. And I think that the answer to it is to see that the whole thing is a bunch of lies. Now, not everything is a lie. I mean, obviously the computers are real, the tech is real and all this stuff, but it is a lie to promote and to try to convince people that you're going to be downloaded into a zip drive. You're going to all this transhumanist nonsense. It's not, number one, even if it was true, it wouldn't be for you. It would be for Soros and all the global elite. It wouldn't be for the common man. And even H.G. Wells says that. Like I said, he says, oh, it's not for you, but you can serve a great purpose in serving us and then just die so that we can have the Star Trek future. Not for you. But so
that's real altruism.
Right. I think the answer is to return to God, to the Bible, to spiritual realities. I don't think it's that difficult. And in fact, all this crazy evil stuff actually vindicates the biblical conception of good and evil, in my view.
The bottom line with Zbigniew Brzezinski, his bottom line is what, Jay?
He was chosen by Rockefeller because of his insight into the technocratic future. So he went to McGill University, which, interesting side note, was one of the super duper hotbeds of MK Ultra. A lot of the MK Ultra stuff was done at McGill University. That's ironically where Brzezinski comes out of. And a lot of people don't know, by the way, that MK Ultra wasn't just, mind control and testing assassins and all this kind of stuff. There was some of that, but MK Ultra was a broad, wide-ranging thing that dealt with dozens and dozens of universities, dozens and dozens of experiments. And it was actually about manipulating man himself and man's environment. So actually geoengineering, DARPA, they all come out of MK. They're all connected programs. And this is what a lot of people don't understand. And I didn't understand that until I read The History of DARPA by Annie Jacobson. I read Alex Abea's Rand Corporation book. I read all these books that kind of dealt with different topics. And I realized, they're all talking about the same thing, right? Atomic Energy Commission actually had kind of a place over a lot of these programs. And they're all connected. So Brzezinski matters because when he was at McGill and then afterwards he wrote Between Two Ages, Rockefeller read it and he said, this guy knows what's up. He calls Kissinger and he says, give this guy a position at the Trilateral Commission. So, Mr. President, I've called. This is Henry Kissinger. I would like to talk to you. Would you like to chair the committee of the Trilateral Commission? We're creating it this for you. Right. So Henry Kissinger actually calls up Brzezinski, says, come run the Trilateral Commission. We created this for you. And that's what he does. So he sits in this kind of supra, governmental type think tank status. He organizes all kinds of things. Mujahideen, 1978, 79, that was all Brzezinski type stuff. So he's a big time controller, deep state guy. And that's why he matters. His core ideology was not America, not Sovietism. He wrote a lot about Cold War, but his core thing was the technocracy.
And his daughter, who's now hooked up with Scarborough, is this just her version of sort of advancing dad's ideology as as she can?
Remember that clip where she was like, we tell you what to think. Right? Remember when that came out? Like she actually
I forgot about that.
But yeah. So she has to. I don't know if she has as high IQ as her high in IQ as her dad, but she has to kind of roughly know what's going on.
Yeah, and she wants to. She got the will. She doesn't have the power. I get it.
That's a good way to put it, right?
Wow. So that's a good thing, I'll tell you, some of this stuff is just amazing. It really is.
John, I just can't believe how unified the plan is and how all these people write and say the same thing. They really do have like a basic pattern. Even the books are written with the same basic pattern of we're in a time of crisis. This is the only solution, right? They're all written the same way. They all say the same stuff. And what that says to me, what that shows is coordination, you see.
You bet. MK Ultra, that was German-based thing, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, John Marks says that he thinks that might be the origin of it. I don't know if you know Aaron and Melissa Dykes, but I've got to be friends with them, and they did that really good documentary, Minds of Men, which is like a really in-depth 3-hour, 4-hour treatment of the history of MK Ultra. So they got really deep into it, and I think they do consider that as one of the theories of where it arose. So I'm not 100%, I don't recall off the top of my head the exact origin of the name of the program, but essentially, yes, whether it's the experiments that the paperclip guys were doing, Soviets were doing the exact same types of experiments under Stalin.
Mhm.
And even prior, actually, I think you can go back to people like Pavlov, Skinner. You can go back to, some have even proposed that perhaps Crowley, when he was writing his drug diaries, this might have even been a nascent form of MK Ultra because he was a British intelligence asset. And so he was passing the drug diaries on to whoever his handlers were in British intelligence. They were looking at and studying, hey, look, here's this, crazy magician out here, dosing up all these dum-dums, and here's their experiences, and dosing himself, by the way. So, hey, actually, maybe we could weaponize this, drug stuff. And so Huxley, he's the Tavistock, they're the British counterpart to the U.S. MK Ultra program. And what I did in my book was, especially in part 2, was I really zoned in and focused on movies that dealt with MK Ultra. And I'll tell you what, one of these other key globalism books guys that everybody forgets is a guy called John C. Lilly. And John C. Lilly was the dolphin creeper weirdo who quite literally had strange fixations, if you catch my drift, on about dolphins. He's the guy who dosed dolphins with LSD to see what it would do.
Mhm.
Well, John C. Lilly also wrote a book that dealt with dosing up not just dolphins, but kids with LSD to see what happens. So this guy was a complete raging lunatic. He's part of MK Ultra, 100% confirmed. And so I read this awful, it's one of the worst books I've ever read. I mean, in the sense of written, like it's almost unreadable if you read Programming and Metaprogramming in the Human Biocomputer. But he literally says in there, this is the closest thing, John, I could find to ever getting documentation on, like from an actual MK Ultra guy. And I mean, you could read Jose Delgado and all those guys have books too, but I was looking for specific documentation from an MK Ultra person who said he could fragment the mind and actually program the different ultras and fragments, and then that he saw it almost in like a scientific, like he could scientifically do it. Now, maybe he couldn't actually do that, but he at least claims it in that book. That book is crazy.
When did that book come out?
That's a good question. Probably late 60s, early 70s. I can look and see real quick here, but Programming and Meta Programming in the Human Biocomputer. By the way, this is another transhumanist title because they view the body. This is 68. They view the human body as just another computer, and so therefore there's a chapter. I cite all this in the book, but there's a chapter where Lilly says that his technique was something like he would give a certain dosage when the trip was at its peak. He would do weird things like put a mirror in front of people's faces, or he would shine a light, or he would do literally like the what you think of in mind control experiments, like Mel Gibson sitting there with on the chair in a conspiracy theory. Yeah. He actually mentions a spinning, the spinny thing,
Vortex. Yeah.
and he says that this would cause a dissociation, but it's real. Honestly, it's really hard to read the way he writes. It's like half the time you don't know what he's talking about because he kind of writes in these like neologisms and words he's made up. So it's really hard to parcel it all out. But he does seem to essentially say that he could, in his mind at least, he thought he could create alters and actually program each specific alter. So that kind of blew me away because I couldn't ever, I wrote a lot on MK Ultra and I couldn't find a specific guy saying, "Oh, I can do it. I'm your dude."
Is there any particular movie that's come out recently you think is particularly damaging to the human being? I'll just ask it that way,
Yeah. I mean, a lot of times I won't watch the whole, like if it gets too gross, I'll just turn it off. There was the worst one I can remember recently was the Netflix Suspiria sequel. So they did this sequel to Suspiria. And you're watching the movie, and for like the first half of it, you're like, "Oh, this is all right." It's kind of interesting. They've got some witches doing some witchy things. If you've seen, the first Suspiria from Argento from the '70s, you know what I'm talking about.
Mm.
And then the last third of the movie is just this gigantic. How do I put it? PMS blood splattering ritual that just goes wild. Blood is just disgusting. So actually, I turned it off. It was the most disgusting thing on film I've ever seen.
Wow.
So I would say, do not watch the Suspiria remake. I didn't know that was in there, but yeah. But yeah, I think you're right to talk about the usage of film in this, because who was I reading? One of these MKUltra guys actually had strapped people down and forced them to watch, really bizarre, degrading, like you see in Clockwork Orange. You remember when Alex is, one of those guys actually did that. There was a guy one of the MKUltra doctors did this. He actually penned people down, made them watch really degrading, dehumanizing stuff, and it puts them in a catatonic state. You just kind of some people think it makes you, it's going to make you more, but actually it just turn them into these vegetables. So I think that a lot of Hollywood, a lot of these really gross horror movies, this kind of stuff, it's actually absolutely intended to do that.
Unbelievable. Now, what's next for you? Let me see here. You have, you have a number of books yourself. You have Esoteric Hollywood, and Esoteric Hollywood came out this year. When was it released? Or are we on the verge of it, or is it out now?
I think it came out in January, so it's been out.
Okay, yeah, it's been out
January.
Yeah. So what's next? I know you're not just sitting around.
No. Lately, we've expanded into doing not just Hollywood, not just Globalism book talks, but also I've been debating some pretty big name atheists. So a lot of people might be familiar with Matt Dillahunty. He has debated Jordan Peterson. They had a really famous debate. Dillahunty has traveled with Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, these guys. So we actually organized a big debate. That was a couple weeks ago. That went over really good. So we've had a lot of these big scale, theist debates lately. 2 or 3 of those that were pretty good. So I branched out into doing that. Hopefully there'll be an Esoteric Hollywood 3. We'll have to wait and see what the publisher wants to do on that. If there's not going to be Esoteric Hollywood 3, then I'll probably do the next book on something philosophy related. So I haven't actually written a philosophy book yet, but that's what's up in the future. And then the way that the Hollywood stuff works now is I basically just do live streams. I do live streams where I talk about 3 or 4 movies based around some theme, let's do the Alien franchise. Let's do all of Val Kilmer movies or something like that. Some weird mix of films, and then we just kind of pop off and riff on, what we see in the films. So focusing a lot of time on YouTube, basically. My YouTube channel is the main sort of outlet right now. And then the subscription service at the website.
Cool. Now, what do they get? How much does it cost, and what do they get?
So basically, all of this archives is similar to what you do with Caravan of Midnight, Art Midnight. I have a lot of archives but in my case, it's not. I mean, there's some interviews, but mainly it's just lectures. So if you're interested in, say, learning, you want a grad level understanding of the New World Order, that's what I do. I give you that from their own writings. That's really my main selling point. Is I don't have time to read 1,300 pages of Carol Quigley's Strategy and Hope. Well, good news, I've read it for you. Let me summarize it for you. Subscribe to Jay's Analysis, $4.95 a month, $60 a year.
Researchers and writers and presenters, lecturers like yourself, we're pretty patient people. I mean, I don't do the variety of things that you do. I do other stuff, different stuff, but it's in the same groove. But I'll tell you, when you consider that, I mean, and a statistic is a statistic, right? But the latest one that I read that was sort of annoying was that within 16 seconds, the average American is already impatient. So how can you expect them to sit down and read anything and learn anything if they get impatient after 16 seconds? We've had people in the past, not so much lately, but in the past, we've had people just say, Now they could not get their membership to Caravan to Midnight done quick enough. They just quit. They just gave up. It's like this call will sort it out in a few seconds. It'll be fine. It's like, no, damn it, there must be something wrong with it, or I should be able to do it within my 16 seconds. Oh, that's it. 16 seconds. I'm through.
Yeah, I have a lot of younger guys that follow my work, like millennial and Gen Z age guys, and I get a lot of messages. Like I'll mention on a stream, I'll say, "Oh, I did an analysis of a Truman Show 2 years ago," and I'll get a message saying, "Will you send me your analysis of the Truman Show?" It would take you like 2 seconds to Google it. Like what? Like I'm supposed to like go and do the Googling for you now. I mean, it's just super lazy people. It cracks me up. But yeah, I have the same problem with the expectation of like immediacy, and it's even affected me. Like I've noticed that I read less than I did 2 years ago. So I think all this internet, all the screen, all this stuff it's really getting on my nerves.
Well, it all goes back to what we should do and what we should not do. And I'm just going to take what Salk said, but I'm going to bend it to my own purposes by just saying, I'm pretty sure this is true. A little wisdom is better than a lot of knowledge. Otherwise, you wind up with the same effect as teaching a monkey who has no judgment how to shoot a gun. Although I'm not so sure that's true either. This one guy gave this monkey, I get these clips out of South Africa all the time. He gives this monkey the finger, and that monkey just sat there and went, really, and just kicked him with both feet in the face, just knocked him right on his ASS. It was hysterical. So,
from the middle finger.
Yeah, he gave him the middle finger. What a moron!
The monkey
monkey's sitting there minding his own business. This idiot comes by and gives him the finger. The monkey goes, man, just knocked him on his backside. It was hysterical. I'm telling you, ridiculous. But so I don't think I'm going to talk about them teaching the monkey how to shoot a gun anymore, because I'm thinking that they'll get up there on the roof, they'll mess with your antenna connections, they'll mess with your cable TV, your phone wires. You'll see a little hand come out of one of the kitchen cabinets because they've come in the kitchen to they just raise hell. They'll get in there and get into your liquor, and they're all passed out. When you get back to your house, they're all drunk. They're drunk and passed out all over the kitchen. It's insane over there. But human beings are. You get one of those tweaked up, and the one human being can cause a lot of damage. I mean, if a squirrel can run down the wrong power line and short out half the neighborhood, but that's small stuff compared to what people will do. So I'm thinking that it goes back to we can do these things. We know how to do them. The question is, should we do them ever, even once?
Exactly.
And sometimes it's that Oscar Wilde thing. For some people, the only thing they cannot resist is temptation.
Yeah, I did a chapter in the first book about the difference between wisdom and knowledge. So I think you're right. Like we have this just a grand scale, mega level amount of knowledge and data, but that's really useless if you don't have the wisdom to apply it correctly. So I think even the ancient myths, like the myth of Phaethon, I did a whole chapter on that, where that's kind of the warning of that story. And there's other stories that give us similar warnings. Prometheus mythology, this kind of stuff. It's kind of, if you can steal the fire of the gods, but if you don't have the wisdom to apply it correctly and the balance to apply these things, then it leads to ruin. I think that our scientific technocracy, our obsession with scientism and tech, if it doesn't have ethics and if it doesn't have wisdom to guide it, it's self-destructive, and it's counterproductive. It's pointless. It's preposterous. I mean, this is an archetypal story in so many movies, so many novels, so many classics of literature, and here we are, like Faustian morons. We're just going to destroy ourselves because we're obsessed with, what? Tech? What's the point?
Here's one out of left field. I'm going to order one off the menu, all right?
Okay.
Is being a comedian part of your repertoire?
Absolutely.
All right. I have never met any comedian ever who wasn't a little bit edgy or really edgy, depends. But there is an element of edginess in Every one of them. Why is that anyway? Because I'm not saying you're unpleasant. I'm not picking on you. You're not. But I could see you're a serious cat. This is a serious cat who's also a comedian, really? Is it because this life is just so damn funny? I mean, seriously, what do you make of that? There is an edginess to comedians.
Well, I used to do stand up, and I did it because I wanted to be a stand up, and I didn't care about anything serious. And then I kind of went through a phase where I got into philosophy in college, and then I got really serious. And then I felt it just felt like my personality was kind of getting imbalanced. I'm not saying I had alters or anything like that. I'm just saying I wasn't an MK Ultra project. I just got you get when you're in your 20s, you get imbalanced, and then you kind of even out as you get older, and you can. If you do a lot of media, do a lot of speaking, this kind of stuff, do a TV show, you get used to being yourself, right? So, early on, you're kind of guarded. Then you can kind of let more and more of your personality out. And that was always there. The first stuff I uploaded years ago on YouTube was all comedic stuff. And so I just felt, more and more comfortable with letting that side of my personality out. And I think it's just being more balanced. Like if you focus on all the dark stuff all the time, you do get kind of depressed. So it helps to lighten the mood by, I don't know,
talking like Terrence McKenna. And should I give John B. Wells the mushroom? Would he accept the mushroom? What kind of a trip would John B. Wells have on the mushroom? I don't know.
Right. So you just throw it in there. And by the way, it throws people for a loop too, because they think, oh, you're this super serious dude. And then suddenly you're talking like Terrence McKenna. And, I remember when we were filming the TV show, I wanted to be really goofy when we were doing the guy show. And they were like, they had in mind this really, commentary, serious show. And I was like, I really want to be goofy. And so I just start talking like to Michael Caine. And I start talking like the way that Bruce Wayne, he's going to be a boomer. He's going to be, and they're just like, whoa, who's like this guy? Suddenly he's talking like, Michael Caine. Where did this come from? And I was like, what, didn't you realize that this is kind of my shtick? This is what I do. Like I've always done this. And they're like, no, don't do that. Go back to being the serious guy. And I started talking like Nicolas Cage, talking about Cheetos. I was doing my Nick Cage where he's talking about Cheetos, and he's talking about the cheese on the fingers, and all this stuff. What are you doing? So,
Nicolas Cage, there's a strange cat. I could never understand his career.
He is a strange cat. Well, Coppola's, right? I mean, they have, Hollywood royalty.
Might have had something to do with it, yeah, possibly.
But he's also, interestingly, into esoteric stuff, which is always, I mean, I don't guess it should be that surprising given what I cover, but I remember I was watching some interview, I think maybe Jay Leno, and he was talking about being into Plato and Platonism and Neoplatonism. And there was this other interview where he's talking about doing acid. I was staring into the eyes of my cat for about 6 hours straight. He's a wacky guy. I just think he's fun because he's so wacky.
He and Carrie could be brothers, kind of. Carrie's just a little bit more, a little wackier. Well, maybe not, just different wacky.
Jim Carrey?
Yeah. Yeah, I can kind of see a little similarity there. Imagine those two drinking.
I can't. Wow. If I could do Jim Carrey, I could do it. But I can always do my Nick Cage. And people said that Nick Cage is in final form. So, but there's a whole repertoire.
There's a David Lynch. I can do my David Lynch.
Wow.
John B., way to go.
Way to go, Coop. Right.
Well, it's good to see that Harvey Keitel is going to be in there with, he was most noted in my memory as screaming a lot. I can see him screaming a lot, a la Reservoir Dogs.
I can do Quentin. I can do Quentin, but I can't do Harvey.
Right. De Niro.
Quentin ends up being really vulgar, though. So maybe I shouldn't. I did like a censored.
I did a censored. If I do a censored, Quentin, right? I'm gonna shut your butt up, John. I'm gonna shut your butt up. If I do my censored, Quentin Tarantino, then it gets really fast, and then you want to cuss, but you have to be censored.
Wow, that's frightening.
Yeah, like
Keitel and Pesci and De Niro and Pacino, they're all going to get together and do this. They've done it. This thing called The Irishman.
Oh yeah. I saw that. I mean, I saw the ad. I haven't seen it.
It's some ridiculously long movie. But then the Lucasfilm thing where they can make him look younger and younger and younger and younger.
Oh,
They got some
right,
sort of a
right.
program that'll do that. That doesn't bode well for our future. Once it's much cheaper, much less exclusive, and now is being deployed to every news outlet in the country. The people you're listening to aren't even real people.
Wow.
If they are real people, well, they don't look like that when they walk out on the street. It's going to be strange, man.
Did you see that movie, The Congress?
See what?
There's a movie. It was like it was an independent science fiction movie that kind of popular maybe 5 or 6 years ago called The Congress. It had Robin Wright.
I heard about it, but I never saw it.
Well, it's the plot is that. So here's another example of this sort of predictive programming where basically she's playing herself, Robin Wright, the actress, and from Princess Bride and this kind of stuff. And it's in a near future dystopia. And she goes to actually it's Harvey Keitel, I think, who is her manager at Warner Brothers or something. I don't know. And she gets digitized. They put her into this. It's real, like a real thing that they do, where they digitize the actor or the actress from all angles, and they get the person to do all their range of expressions and emotions and all this, and then they've got a digital copy of the person. And then the movie takes a really weird dystopian turn. It's a good movie. I would recommend it. But I remember thinking when that came out, I was like, wow, this is our future. They're going to digitize the actors, and then what you see in the films is just going to be like these CGI recreations. So there will always be like a young Robert De Niro character or something,
It could wind up that the whole world winds up a complete and total current human replication. The humans are actually gone. Once they're digitized, everybody's sufficiently split up, and everybody's talking. Their heads are talking to their smartphones. Any kind of a reality that you want is there. So you can conduct your own little world and not actually have any people there. You just have replication, digital duplications of people who used to exist but who don't anymore.
Right. Exactly.
Well, I don't know, man. It seems like it might be time to just steady up the head and just get a fishing rod and go see if I can find a fish somewhere. Just sit there and be quiet for a while. Don't bring any tech with me of any kind other than a string and a piece of wood and a hook on it with maybe there's a worm around here somewhere. But the Save the Worms lobby might come after me. So something that looks like a worm. A digital reproduction of a worm. This will attract a fish. Wow. Good talking to you, man. I mean,
right. Yeah, absolutely.
You coming this way anytime soon with one of your lectures? I'd like that. Or you stream them all over the place anyway, yeah?
I have done some traveling and lecturing this year. Where are you located? Texas?
Well, I'm just Dallas area.
Oh, okay. I'll be back in Austin. I was in Austin for a couple of events last month. So I'll probably be in the Austin area in the next month, yeah.
Okay. Might run into you down there, give me a heads up when you're going to be down there.
Do you ever do in-studio stuff there?
Rarely, but certainly possible. If you go to Austin very often, I'm sort of looking at Austin as maybe a little bit more wide open. Dallas is so overbuilt; it looks like metropolis 22nd century, especially at night. It's nuts.
Yeah,
it's looking more like
it's going to be a big smart city hub, isn't it? Austin.
Austin will be, but there's still some space out there somewhere.
Okay. Probably
wind up in Panama like Mr. Hughes. I'm pretty sure he didn't wind up in Las Vegas. I'm pretty sure it's Panama.
Right.
Anyway.
Sipping pee in those jars.
Yeah. Take care of yourself. God bless. Thanks for coming out and spending time with us. Very nice of you.
Thank you.
All right, then. Ladies and gentlemen, I gotta tell you, it's not boring.